So, welcome everyone to the Sheldon and Lewis Show, where we interview fascinating people about the incredible work they're doing. And today we have Monica Skewes. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Skewes, yeah.
And Monica is a professor in psychology at Montana State University and also works with the um, CARES group. And she'll explain that a little bit more and what the acronym stands for. But I think we'll have a wonderful conversation about substance use in Indian country and what do we do about it? What are the impediments and how do we overcome them? So, Monica, take it away. Say anything more you wish to say.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm Monica Skewes. I'm a professor in the psychology department at Montana State University. We're in Bozeman. Montana is a pretty rural state. There are 7 different American Indian reservations with 12 or more cultural groups in the state. There's only about 1 million people in the state, so a lot of these communities are spread pretty far apart from each other. Um, Sadly, we are have the highest suicide rate in the nation right now, so that is a problem that we're dealing with for sure. Substance use as well. Along with my work in the psychology department, I am affiliated with the Center for American Indian and Rural Health Equity, or CARE, and that's a research center in Montana at MSU that examines health equity in just rural and native populations across the state and beyond.
Very cool. So the article that brought my attention to you was the 2021 article on historical trauma and substance use among American Indian people with current substance use problems. And I wanted to invite you to speak a little bit about that, but also we want to venture further into your more current work, which we may not have stumbled into. So, so can you tell us about that work from 2021?
Sure. So I've been working with a tribal community in Montana since 2014. And I do a type of research that's called community-based participatory research, or CBPR. And in this type of research, academic research partners and community research partners work together to address concerns that the community has, to come up with solutions. So it's really an equal partnership that's not guided by the academic, but it's like a mutual give and take where I have certain expertise that I bring to the table. The community has all sorts of knowledge and expertise that they bring to the table. And together we work together in partnership to address whatever problems they care about. So I started working there, and the paper that you're referring to is one of my earlier papers that came out of this work. But I've done a series of studies to understand addiction and substance use in the community and mental health concerns that go along with it. And we did like a number of studies. The first one that we did was a key informant interview study. Oh, did you lose us, Lewis?
Lost a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
I was telling Monica earlier, Sheldon, that it's close, it's getting close to finals week here,
Oh,
the University of Maine, and the internet is getting wonky.
okay.
So we'll do our best.
That's
Okay.
okay.
If not, we could always switch to my to my
Yeah,
account. Yeah.
yeah, we can do that. If it happens again, yeah,
Okay.
We'll hope for the best.
Okay.
Yeah,
Control the Orono community. So I'm sorry, Monica.
no problem. Yeah, so I was just talking about some of the earlier work that led to this survey study that we did. So we started with key informant interviews to really get a lay of the land and understand people's experiences and priorities and what it's like to live in the reservation. What are the things that contribute to substance use and mental health problems? How are ways that people get through those types of problems and what types of interventions might be helpful? And we did some analyses and figured out a number of variables that people said, hey, these are important. This is what you need to look at. And then we did a survey of tribal members who have a substance use problem. And we quantitatively assessed those variables to look at relationships between different like risk and protective factors. And some of the factors they identified immediately were historical trauma and like the loss of identity that goes along with historical trauma due to the history of colonization and displacement and all sorts of oppression and abuses that these people have experienced. Um, in particular, the consequences of the boarding school. I'm sure you know about the indigenous boarding schools.
Right,
So
right.
we had a number of participants who were survivors of boarding schools or were descendants of people who had survived these boarding school experiences. And they really talked about how, being removed from your family at an early age and placed somewhere else where you didn't know what was going on and you weren't allowed to speak your language or practice your spirituality or your traditions, it served to disconnect people from their culture. So when we're talking to folks at the reservation, they're like, it's our culture that's our healing, our treatment. Our culture is protective. Like when I reconnect with my culture, I'm healthier. I was able to overcome addiction, things like that. And they really identified like that loss of culture that happened through the boarding school movement as a huge risk factor. And it
Mm.
makes perfect sense. Like not only were these kids traumatized, and childhood trauma is a big risk factor for mental health and addiction, but like those protective like teachings were disrupted in that when the kids were taken away, they didn't learn the things they normally would have learned at home. And it's that intergenerational transmission of knowledge and healing practices really got disrupted. So when they went back to the reservation, they had this history of trauma. They didn't really have a strong social network because they grew up away from their family and their community. They didn't know their language anymore or didn't know their traditions or their spiritual practices. And this kind of set the stage on a collective level for future substance use problems and mental health concerns. And there's a ton of research that even shows that the descendants of people who went through this are more likely to have mental health problems and addiction. So that was one thing that we learned.
I think we see that in Maine, that most of the people that we're dealing with now were not in residential schools, but their parents were, or their parents' parents were. And consequently, they got minimal parenting as they were growing up. And we see families where kids begin to use substances at age 7 and begin to sell them as early as
Mm.
7 or 8 or 9. And it it's a family business. And it's I think it's almost a unfortunate solidifying factor for the family. Like it's something that everyone can coalesce around. Like um I talked to a woman earlier today who said that she was proud she proudly said, well, we use, but we're functional users. And so that was their identity, um, which didn't match my assessment of their family. But then, who cares what I think? Um, but yeah, I so hear what you're saying that it was such an incredible disruption of cultural continuity, but also family continuity or, you know, um, common sense continuity of caregiving or parenting or anything like that.
Yeah,
So,
you're absolutely right. Yeah. And also just that sense of identity. So the loss of identity translates into problems, not knowing who you are, not having a good sense of who you are. That led to mental health problems. And I think what you just said resonated with me because people were able to find a new community and new connection and belonging in circles of people who use drugs.
right.
So the drug use is not entirely bad. I mean, of course, it's obvious to see the harmful effects of drug use and all the health problems and the issues, but like it served an important role. It connected people to a new community that had like a shared interest. I mean, it's definitely not the healthiest option that you'd hope for people, but at the same time, you understand what they're looking for.
Right, right. And aren't we all looking for belonging? We
Yeah.
want, I mean, that's so important to all of us. Yeah,
I was very struck by the sort of two sides of this that you shared with us because a lot of times people talk about intergenerational trauma of all kinds, but you added the other side, sort of the counterbalance of it, that it's an intergenerational disruption of cultural continuity. And so the trauma doesn't exist by itself.
That's right.
I think that's really helpful.
I
yeah,
mean, everything in nature has both sides, right? Like you can't transmit trauma without also transmitting resilience. Like there's a fundamental balance in nature, and there is definitely that inherited intergenerational like resilience as well.
yeah, yeah. And that's interesting because we, my group just finished a study where we're looking at resilience. And as part of that, we were collecting life stories and we wanted to see if we could predict return to use. And what we found out is um, forget every other variable. If you go home to the people with whom you used, you will return to use, like virtually 100%.
Mm.
And I wondered if you'd seen anything similar.
We have, and I mean, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It makes sense, but if you think of addiction as like partly an issue of on the brain level where it's paired, where your substance use is paired with the people and environment that you're using in, then it would be an incredible trigger to see the people you use with, to be in the places you used with. And sometimes the cravings are overwhelming before the person is even aware of what's happened. They might not even know that they've encountered a trigger until it's kind of too late. So we've definitely seen that. And we've talked to a number of people who said that they did great when they were off the reservation for treatment. They went to a rehab center somewhere else. They did great. They were flourishing. They came back like within a day, they were back in the same environment that gave rise to the substance use problem and they relapsed right away. It's very common.
Yeah, that's what we've seen too in Maine, that in a sense you can't go home. I mean, and if you go home, it has to be a different home. Like you have to construct sort of a recovery home that's not your original home unless all of your siblings are in recovery, which is pretty rare, you know. Um,
And so many people don't have the chance to move away, or they lose so much if they move away. Like that's their home. These are
right,
their relatives. So
right. Well, and I hear probably like Montana. So where the university is in Orono, Maine, which is about 10 minutes away from Bangor, Maine, which is famous for Stephen King. But it's also the urban Indian center of Maine. So it's where everyone comes from the rural and remote reservations and then goes back. And it reminds me a little bit of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, where I used to live, where, there was this constant ebb and flow from rural and remote to Saskatoon. And we have that same sort of thing in Bangor, and I'm guessing you may have the same sort of thing in Bozeman, that people come and go back to the reservation, off the reservation looking for work, back to the reservation. And it presents incredible challenges for maintenance of well, to avoid substances. How do you do that when you're constantly coming and going?
Yeah, it definitely happens. I mean, even our students who come from reservations, they're homesick and a lot of times they go home for Thanksgiving and don't come back, so it definitely happens a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And so that brings me up to another one of your papers that I looked at, which is attitudes regarding harm reduction and abstinence intervention strategies for alcohol problems among American Indian Alaska Native college students. So, um, can you tell us a little bit about that study and what you learned?
Sure. Yeah. Before I came to Montana, I was in Alaska. And a lot of the same things hold true in many indigenous, communities. But we're really interested, my research partner and I are really interested in harm reduction, which I'm sure you're aware of. I think Maine has kind of done a lot of work in harm reduction, particularly around opioid problems. But it's evidence-based strategy that helps people live longer, and there's a number of harm reduction strategies, including medications for opioid use disorder, including, safe injection sites and needle exchange programs and things like that. But harm reduction is even like using a designated driver is harm reduction, because maybe you're still drinking and maybe it's still harmful for your health, but you're less likely to die. So anything that protects your health in any kind of way is harm reduction. So my colleague and I were really interested in harm reduction for alcohol in particular, because there are some negative attitudes among Native people about alcohol in general, which are understandable. They're like, look, alcohol has really harmed our people. It was a tool of colonization when colonists and traders brought alcohol in order to have an unfair advantage in business dealings. There are high rates of alcohol problems in American Indian and Alaska Native people, although they also have the highest rates of abstinence. There are more Native people who've never touched alcohol in their lives than of any other ethnic group. But there's also high rates of alcohol use disorders and binge drinking and alcohol related health problems. So we were wondering, what would people even think about harm reduction for alcohol? Meaning, like, what about drinking less, like moderation goals, or using a designated driver, or making sure that you eat a full meal before you start drinking so your blood alcohol level doesn't get too high, or drinking with a safe person that won't let you do something silly and dangerous, or, there's a number of these harm reduction strategies that are proven to really save lives and be useful and be helpful. But we were wondering, would people use them? Like, would they say no, telling someone to drink less is enabling them? Or would they say, no, that makes sense? So we did some studies to try to tease that apart, and we got kind of the gamut of views on that. Definitely some people believe whatever saves lives is worth trying, And then other people are like, no, I think you're condoning alcohol use. And if you teach them how to drink less, that's not a good goal. The only good goal is abstinence. So we really wanted to dive into that a little bit more. And I do find it interesting in Native culture in particular, because In my experience working with Native communities, they are very pragmatic and they're very reasonable and they're very like, let's use whatever works. Um, when I first got to Montana State University, I met an undergraduate student who was from the reservation that I'm working with. And he was all gung ho in favor of harm reduction. And his whole thing was needle exchange programs. He was like, I have friends and relatives who are dying, and we need to bring needle exchange programs and Narcan to the community and save lives. And he was all about it. And I said, that's amazing. Like, I agree. What do you think about harm reduction for alcohol use? And he was like, no, that's not a good idea. It's very nuanced in how people view, these different types of strategies. I mean, people may prefer that everybody be abstinent from alcohol forever, and that is a worthwhile goal if that's someone's goal. But what are we going to do for the people who can't do that or don't want to do that? How are we going to help save lives when people are going to continue using drugs and alcohol? And that's where we were kind of coming in with that angle.
Yeah, that seems so important. And I see that sort of contradiction all across Indian country and Maine, that that some people are for harm reduction for opiates, but not for alcohol, and vice versa. And some people see buprenorphine as just another addiction. And it it's just really complicated.
Someone told me once that if you arrived at someone's house with,
Here, come closer to the microphone. This is my wife Barbara, who works in harm reduction for the 5 tribes.
Oh, hi, Barbara.
hi, someone told
Hi,
me
Barb.
that if you arrived at someone's house with a gram of heroin, it would be shared. But if you arrived with a 6-pack of alcohol, you'd be shunned.
Wow.
So there's just this absolute, uh, you know, um, elimination of alcohol. But heroin was better.
I mean, I kind of have seen that too. Alcohol has a special meaning.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, the cultural meaning.
Yeah.
Well, and even Eduardo Duran, when he was commissioning people to create the spirits of substances, do you know Eduardo Duran, the soul wound?
Yes.
Well, yeah, and when he talks about when he was creating the physical representation of the spirit of substances, it took a long time to get alcohol. He said he got methamphetamine and all these other ones, but alcohol was really elusive.
That's so interesting.
Was it, and when was it that he started carrying around that empty bottle of Jack Daniels to present to people as the spirit of their alcohol?
Hmm.
I can't remember, but he tells a lot of funny stories about, oh no, did we lose it again?
No, we're here.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, he tells a lot of funny stories about going into hospitals with his empty bottle of Jack Daniels and nurses freaking out, as he pulls it out to ask people if they know the songs for this particular substance and the protocols and things like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. When I lived in Saskatchewan, I hung out with this elder from Sturgeon Lake First Nations, and his position was um, he would send his troops around on Sunday morning to round up any drunks he could find to throw them into the sweat lodge because he said they need to be there more than anyone else, no matter what.
That's so interesting that you said that because I just read another article about harm reduction, alcohol related harm reduction in a Native community. And like there were vastly different views. They did focus groups with treatment providers who were in favor. They were like, yeah, that sounds good. Then they did focus groups with community members that were against it, who were saying, I don't think that's good. And one of the things that kept coming up a lot was in many Native traditions, you're not allowed to participate in ceremony if you have had any alcohol or drugs in a certain period of time. And in this community, it was like within the past 4 days, because they believed that your spirit wasn't really there. So if you went into sweat lodge, that you could actually do spiritual harm to yourself if you'd had any alcohol or drugs. Some other communities are like, you have to be completely abstinent for a long period of time before you can do ceremony. And at the same time, they're like, ceremony is the thing that helps people recover. So if the thing that helps you recover is something that is forbidden to you because you have not yet recovered, it creates this tension and this problem where some people were like, I don't care. Let's have them come to ceremony. Other people are like, no, it's dangerous to them. We can't have that. So there's not any agreement, but I just thought it was fascinating.
It is, because the thing that I loved about this elder, his name was John Charles, was that he had a pretty high rate of like bringing people back from the brinks of despair. You know, that the fact that he was so accepting and you know, his motto is sort of wherever you are, I'm there too. You. And um, and I don't take no excuses with his other motto. You, too bad you drank. Well, come bar from the lodge. And it was, I mean, and mostly here in Maine, we see the opposite. You know, we see the abstinence on the part of elders, the abstinence model. And what I see, and I'm interested in your thoughts, is that it kind of puts a barrier between people who are beginning their journey to recovery and culture. Like they feel like they can't participate in culture because it's sort of a shame inducing attitude.
Yeah,
And
we see that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting where people draw the line,
Mm.
and that must be similar to what you found in the research project.
Yeah, we've definitely found when we were working with the people who have active substance use disorder, they often feel on the outskirts of society. They feel like they're not welcome to, be a part of the community. They feel like they need to get sober first and then they can connect with other people and join the community and practice their culture. But it's through connecting with the community and practicing their culture that they will get sober. So it's a little bit of a catch-22.
Right. That's what we've observed also.
So how do you break into that circle? How do you open that up?
Yeah, so there are some people, some community leaders that are really working pretty hard at getting other people involved, saying, okay, so maybe it's not good for you to sweat if you're drinking or using, but you can come tend the fire. You can come sit by the fire. You can hear the stories. You can celebrate, bring people water afterwards. You can be involved. Or just saying like to people, we want you there. We want you to come to the powwow. We want you to come to, the group. That goes a long way. And we're currently working on an intervention. It's a culturally adapted relapse prevention program for tribal members who have a substance use problem. And one of the things that we do at the beginning of each session is we have someone from the community come provide an invitation to do something fun, cultural, or meaningful in some way, saying like, there's a basketball game, and basketball is a cultural activity in this community. Say there's a basketball game on Friday. It starts at this time. Here's where it is. I want you to come. You're welcome to come. Here's what it'll be like. I'll be there so you know somebody. And please come if you need a ride. We want you to be there. Or there's a medicine wheel support group that happens in town. you know, you're welcome. You don't have to be sober. Just here's what it'll be like, and we want you to come. So we're providing invitations to people so that they know that they're wanted and welcome, at least by the people providing the invitations. So that's what we're trying to do, is reconnect people with the community.
And that seems so important, because I mean it's isolation and alienation that encourages substance use, I think.
I
And I
agree.
think, yeah.
And it also gives them something to do. A lot of people are like, I don't know what else to do besides use my alcohol or drugs, because that's what I've been doing for 20 years. So I don't know how to have fun, or I'm not sure how to fill my time, or all the people I drink with are over here and I don't know anybody else. And so trying to get them to do something new will fill their time, make them feel like they belong, and also introduce them to new people who might be able to support them.
Right. And it's that community of people who aren't using that they so desperately need to be a part of, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
I feel like it also expands the definition of what ceremony is, because going to a basketball game could be ceremony.
Totally. Totally. So ceremony, it's not just sweat lodge and Sundance. Like, it's smudging. It's like having a walk with a friend every day or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was another paper of yours that I read that I liked, which was training community members to deliver an intervention for substance use disorder, overcoming implementation barriers in American Indian communities. And I think that's sort of what we're talking about. And I thought maybe there's more, ideas from that paper that we could bring into the discussion.
Yeah, one of the things I like the most about our intervention is that it does not need licensed mental health providers to deliver it. So we know some really smart with it, like healthy, like amazing leaders in the community, and they may not have a college degree, but they are capable of delivering interventions. So we went about coming up with an intervention and a training program. So there's just, I mean, this is a very rural community. It's actually considered frontier because it's so rural. And there aren't enough providers to go around. There just aren't enough social workers and counselors and psychologists to meet the needs. And then there's the issues of distrust anyway. Like, how much does this community want to see some outsider? Um, so we're like, let's go ahead and train people who live there, who understand the community and the culture and the problem. They're tribal members. And we developed a training program to overcome some of these barriers, to expand opportunities for treatment. And it was a little bit of trial and error to figure out what kind of training that they needed to deliver the intervention with fidelity. Um, but they can totally do it. They're amazing. So they're delivering the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy with a cultural spin to it, with cultural lessons and activities and things like that. And so we wrote a paper about how we taught them to do this intervention. And we're in the middle of our clinical trial, and they're doing it and they're running it, and at this point they need very little supervision and they're doing great. So I definitely believe in using like community members to do all sorts of health interventions. It overcomes so many barriers. Like, they know each other. They're like, I know this guy, I see him every day. And they start by talking about their familial connections. Like, they've got relatives in common, and it builds trust. And there are people who are going to stay there, as opposed to, a counselor that might go for a year or two and then leave. So, I mean, there's a lot of research in like promotoras and Mexican communities about like women who are respected in the community, who share cancer screening recommendations or diabetes management and just do so much better than like a doctor would do. And so we used that kind of model um, to get the intervention out there.
Yeah,
And,
Go ahead, Sheldon.
Um, I was wondering what your outcome measures are.
For our study, we're measuring substance use behavior. So we're actually measuring alcohol and drug use over time. And we're measuring like quality of life, mental health symptoms. And then we're measuring some protective factors as well. So an increase in ethnic identity is what we're hoping to see, increase in spirituality, increase in social support, communal mastery. Those are these. So we're measuring a ton of stuff at regular intervals over time. So we're hoping to see that substance use and mental health problems go down and these protective factors go up.
Great.
Yeah, that'll be really helpful to have that kind of data available, to point to, because when one talks about the importance of culture for the therapeutic value of culture, the diehard conventional researchers always say, well, there's no randomized double-blind control studies. And I'm always thinking, well, how in the world would you do that anyway? Like, what would you do? Like, hypnotize someone to think that they're getting culture when they're not? I mean, how does that make any sense? But but any data will be better than no data, in terms of arguing for the importance of traditional culture in treatment programs. And I think probably you probably agree with that. So
I do.
yeah. Yeah. So you're doing a lot of amazing stuff. Um, where's your horizon? What do you see? Where do you see the work you're doing going in the future? What's your dream? Where do you
Okay.
want to?
Yeah, the dream is so that we're going to have outcome data for this clinical trial like toward the end of the year. And the dream is that it works and that I could show that it's effective and cost effective. And then we try to figure out how to both sustain it at the community I'm working with. Like, how, once the grant ends, how do we keep it funded? Like, how do we support this? Something we're grappling with right now that we're not really sure we have an answer for. We have a couple ideas, but we're still trying to like figure out, like, okay, so what happens next? How do we keep this going? And then sharing it with other communities. Like, if another community wanted to take our intervention and give it a try, there's some minor adaptations they need to do, like remove the name of the community we're working with and put their own community name in there, or we have stories or lessons, and just to replace this story with one from your own community or culture. So it's easily adaptable, and we're just trying to think about how can we get the word out, how can we provide support to other communities interested in trying it out, and but getting it in to be an established evidence-based practice would be amazing, to the point where, Indian Health Service could get reimbursement for it, or yeah, like drug courts or wellness courts would give credit for going to treatment for doing the intervention, something like that. Getting it, you don't want to do all this work to do a study and then find good results and then nothing happens once the grant ends. And that happens way too often, where some really amazing interventions just die out once a grant is over because nobody knows how to get it out into the world. So that's what we're trying to think about now.
Yeah, and that certainly happened to me, where I've done studies that were just um, remarkable, and the grant ended, and there wasn't the energy to keep it going, even though it worked. So it's frustrating. There's a certain, and maybe you could speak to this, there's a certain inertia to fall back into the dominant paradigm of business as usual. Don't do anything innovative. Don't think outside the box. It's too hard. They're not paying me to do this. I mean, do you see that in where you are?
Yeah, I do. And that's kind of the whole point behind the whole field of implementation science, where it's like, why the heck are these effective interventions not being used when they work and they're cheaper and people like them, and like, why aren't they being used? So there's a kind of pretty recent science within the past, I would say 10, 15 years about studying the mechanisms of getting an evidence-based practice to be implemented in a real world setting. And one of the articles I read was talking about an intervention for bipolar disorder that took place in a VA system. And it saved a ton of money and was very effective at preventing veteran suicides. And they had to do a deep dive into like, why did this die out after the grant ended? When people liked it, it was easier, it worked better, and it was cheaper, and it was like within the VA, and like, what is going on there? So there are theories and models about how to understand these things, but I agree, I think there's some inertia, there's maybe lack of incentives to try something new. There's like, when you're doing a research study, you have so much extra support. You have extra money. You also have a, like, extra supervision and, things to scaffold what you're trying to do. And when the intervention ends, a lot of times that goes away, or when the study ends, that goes away. So yeah, there's got to be a way to make that like bench to bedside gap shorter. You
Yeah.
know,
Mark, you wanted to say something about that.
No,
Yeah.
I was just thinking it's people don't like change.
Oh,
Move closer, Barb.
yeah. She said people don't like change.
Oh,
Even
it
if,
can be as simple as that.
there is that.
yeah. Tell us more about implementation science, because I haven't heard a lot about that, and it sounds fascinating.
It really is. I mean, there's a bunch of articles, and like I said, a whole new science in the past decade or so. And they found that for effective interventions that have been proven to work in randomized clinical trials, behavioral interventions, but even like medications or medical devices, like any type of healthcare innovation, it takes an average of 17 years to get from the outcome data into the hands of the people that need it. And that's when it happens at all. So it usually takes this huge lag. And then a lot of interventions that have been proven to work just don't ever get into the hands of people who need them. And so implementation scientists are trying to study the processes of getting things that work into real world settings, and they have a number of like methods that they use. It involves like a pretty scientific analysis of what are the barriers and what are the facilitators, who are the people who are willing to do this, what are they having to face, and then systematically studying these different aspects of implementation. So I'd be happy to share a couple articles with you on it. It's I think the wave of the future. It is kind of a whole new language, and I'm pretty new to it. So when reading about it, it seems a little overwhelming in terms of particularly like the frameworks. There's so many models and frameworks of how to go about implementation science that are very new, and it's hard to know like, well, which one do you use or what's, because it is so new. But I do believe in the mission of this whole field.
Yeah, it's fascinating because
Mhm.
so many of us sit around wondering, why don't people do this? It seems so obvious.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I-
an
I've
example.
I,
My,
I have a question in this climate that we're in. You're working with the issue of care equity,
Yeah.
and this is not a very friendly climate nationally for that, and also in many states as well. How do you work with that?
It's very stressful, I'll tell you. I know tons of people who've had their NIH grants terminated just midstream. I know a lot of people who've submitted NIH grants that now, like, the whole review panel has just been canceled. So I do think it's going to be I mean, we're finishing up our study, but in terms of like writing another grant, I'm definitely nervous about the chances. I've heard the NIH budget is going to be cut by over 40%, and that a number of the institutes and centers are going to either be eliminated or consolidated with whole new research priorities. So I don't know how fundable this type of work is going to be from federal sources in the near future. Um, I do think there's some foundation funding that is trying to balance that. Like I just saw an email from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation where they're saying, hey, if your grant on DEI issues was canceled recently, we have like a rapid response to try to like keep your funding going. So I'm hopeful that other foundations might be stepping up to carry some of that. Um, in terms of native communities, tribes have the freedom to fund what they want. So if the tribal government wants to put money into an intervention or a prevention program or something like that, they have the right to do that. But you know, everybody is strapped right now, so it's kind of hard to predict how it's going to go. But I really would hate to see health equity research, stop for a period of years. It will set us all back so much.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the example, one of my examples, we did a project where we wanted to change doctors' attitudes toward people using opiates. And so we had medical students do live story interviews. And we shared those interviews, the transcripts, with their doctors and followed the course of the doctor-patient relationship over a year. And, also looked at the McGill short form, pain inventory and things like that. And we found that doctors reading the life story interview was more, had a bigger effect size than opiates, that it was that incredible. And it was free because we had captive medical students. It didn't cost anything. And when the study ended, that was it. It was over. No more. And that was one of my sad experiences of something that was really effective and fun that just
Yeah.
disappeared, for no good reason. But I think this implementation science would probably help me to understand the reason why it disappeared. Like the logic of resistance to
Yeah.
change.
And some of these articles are really great too because they tell stories in the beginning about how this is not a new problem. And one article I read told the story of how this exact same thing happened in the British merchant marines around using citrus for scurvy. Like they're like, here's when they first noticed that citrus was good for scurvy. Like 150 years later or something like that, they first tried a randomized controlled trial, and then like 300 years after that, they implemented it as an intervention. And I'm exaggerating the years, but it was a long time. So it's not a new problem, and I think it is kind of human nature in some ways. Um, but I think it also takes like a champion. It takes a community member to champion these things, to argue for it, to kind of be a bulldog and make it happen.
Yeah, yeah. A leader, someone who has some respect in the community that that people will pay attention to. Hmm, fascinating.
Yes.
So, one of the things we haven't talked about that you've written about is complicated grief. And I know how important that is, but would you like to say a few words about that?
Yeah, so I told you we were doing a survey with tribal members who have substance use problems, and we're assessing, like, we have these calendars that they enter their substance use information on, and we're going through these calendars and noticed, okay, somebody had been sober for like 2 weeks at a time, and then all of a sudden they used a whole lot of alcohol or drugs on a couple days. So we'd say, well, what was going on then? And they'd say, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I just messed up. And our community partner who was helping us with these surveys, who's a member of this community, was like, that's the anniversary of your mother's death. And so she noticed, because she knew everybody and she knew everybody's history, she noticed that they would have periods of like heavy substance use when right after they lose someone or on the anniversary of a loss. And in this community, there's a ton of losses. Like my community partners are at funerals at least once a month and sometimes more. And the losses are like they never get a chance to heal from one loss before another one happens. So the whole community is constantly kind of grieving. But we started thinking like, well, how can we measure grief and in a way, like as a predictor of relapse or mental health problems or substance use problems? And we went to the literature. There were no measures of grief and loss that had been validated in American Indian populations. So my doctoral student at the time, Julie Gaiman, she was like, I'm going to develop a new measure. And so that was her dissertation project. And she's the first author on the grief papers that we've published together. Um, but she's now working to develop a culturally grounded intervention for complicated grief that might help people with all sorts of health problems, with the substance use and other health behaviors that are kind of driven by grief. So definitely we're finding grief to be a huge risk factor in our work and in other health problems as well. It takes such a toll on people's nervous systems and their bodies. And not just that, it drives them to try to comfort themselves. And they do that through food, alcohol, risky sex, driving too fast, all of the things that like distract or soothe, an agitated brain. And then a lot of times those behaviors lead to early deaths and then more grief and loss. So it becomes this cycle. And so we're trying to figure out ways to break that cycle and help people heal from that grief.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's so important.
We routinely
Wait, Barbara has some words. You should be a part of this,
I
Barbara.
can't
Okay, tell me your words and I'll.
Mhm.
record series for this reason, but I would love to hear. I would love to read about her intervention.
Yeah, Barbara was saying that that in where she works, they routinely record the dates of anniversaries like this so they can be proactive in planning with people before the date. And she said that she would love to hear more about, you know, how to do this work.
Yeah, I would be happy to talk more or also connect you with my colleague, Julie.
Yeah,
There's not with specifically Indian populations, but I used to be the editor of a Mind Body Medicine journal, and it took a really long time. There were a lot of papers and a lot of studies that said basically that there were no findings that grief and emotional trauma and loss had any health implications. It really was like a long time. I think it wasn't until I think the study was at Johns Hopkins on what they're calling broken-hearted syndrome, and um, and at that point, people were like, "Oh, maybe there's something here." I guess because their data were good, um, and all of that. And this is very close to my heart, literally my heart, because my father um, had a sudden cardiac death on the anniversary of his mother's death.
Oh, wow.
So I always knew this was something,
Yeah.
but then people say, oh, well, that's anecdotal. And my issue, with that word is that I feel like it gets weaponized against really the truth of human experience.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I think this is really important work that you're doing.
Yeah, I hear you for sure. And what was so interesting to me is that the people we were doing the survey with didn't recognize the pattern. It was somebody else who knew everybody and who was like, no, here's the pattern. Because I mean, that's the power also of community-based research. Like, I would have missed that completely, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You need people who are close to the community to know what's what.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because science tells us we're supposed to be objective and we need to be away from like the people like an outsider would be a better scientist because they're more objective because they're not part of that community. And I just couldn't disagree more.
Mhm.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and I think so many indigenous researchers are overthrowing that silly paradigm of the objective observer as if there is one.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this was really fun. We're getting close to the end. And we have this conference um on two-eyed seeing every January. And um I'm gonna talk to our leadership committee and see if we could invite you and potentially maybe a panel of you and your colleagues to speak on these matters because it seems really important, especially the implementation science to me, because I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But also some of the insights you're gaining, and especially the results of this trial that you're doing. Wow, that would be so useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would love to.
I
great.
agree.
All right. Well, any thoughts? Any visions? Any anything before we call it a night?
No, I think that's good. I have enjoyed talking with you very much. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing, in the mind body healing realm. And I just think we need so much more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much.